The crimson sun cast long shadows across the crystalline peaks of Valane as Kaya moved through the Forbidden's boundary zone with predatory grace. Her midnight blue skin seemed to absorb the dying light, and the ceremonial scars that traced intricate patterns along her arms and shoulders marked her as one of the elite, a shadow blade of the Valani warriors. Every step was silent, every breath controlled, every sense heightened to detect the slightest disturbance in her domain. She had been patrolling these outer reaches for 3 cycles now, ever since the Council of Elders had detected strange energy, signatures piercing their planet's protective barriers. The Valani had learned long ago that visitors from beyond the stars brought nothing but destruction. Their ancestors' blood had been spilled by invaders who came with false promises of peace. Never again. The sound reached her first a low, grinding screech of metal against stone echoing from the weeping gorge. Kaya's hand moved instinctively to the plasma blade at her side, her violet eyes narrowing as she crept toward the source. Smoke rose in dark plumes from behind a cluster of needle-sharp rocks, and the acrid smell of burning fuel filled her nostrils. As she rounded the outcropping, her worst fears materialized before her. A sleek, alien vessel lay crumpled against the canyon wall, its hull split open like a broken egg. The craft bore the distinctive markings of the Sky Dwellers, the same symbols her grandmother had described from the old wars. Her jaw clenched, and fury coursed through her veins like liquid fire. Movement caught her eye. A figure emerged from the wreckage, stumbling and clutching his side. The intruder was tall and lean, with pale skin that seemed almost translucent in the fading light. His clothing was torn and scorched, revealing glimpses of a muscled chest. Beneath, most disturbing of all, he looked fragile, nothing like the armored invaders of legend. Kaya's training took over. She launched herself from her hiding place with lethal precision, her body a blur of controlled violence. The alien had no time to react as she tackled him to the ground, her legs straddling his waist as she pinned his arms above his head. Her blade materialized in her free hand, its edge humming with deadly energy as she pressed it to his throat. "You dare trespass on sacred ground," she snarled in her native tongue, then switched to the common galactic language her people had learned from intercepted transmissions. "Your kind brings only death and suffering. I will end you quickly." The male beneath her should have struggled, should have fought back with the desperate fury of a cornered animal. Instead, he looked up at her with startling green eyes that held no fear, only curiosity, and something else she couldn't identify. His breathing was steady despite the blade at his throat, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "I'm sorry," he said, his words carrying genuine regret. "I didn't mean to intrude. My ship malfunctioned during a survey mission. I'm not here to harm anyone." Kaya's grip tightened on her weapon, but something in his tone gave her pause. Then, impossibly, he did something that shattered her focus entirely. His right hand, which she thought was securely pinned, had somehow worked free. Instead of reaching for a weapon or trying to push her away, he lifted it slowly, carefully, and placed it against the left side of her neck. The touch was feather-light, his fingers finding the exact spot where her pulse thundered against her skin, a calming point, the sacred hollow that only her family had ever touched, that lovers used to express their deepest devotion. Her breath caught in her throat, and her blade wavered as shock rippled through her body. Double quotes. "How ... She whispered, her voice breaking. "How do you know that place?" The male Jackson, she somehow knew his name though he hadn't spoken it, kept his hand there, his thumb tracing a gentle circle against her skin. "I don't know," he admitted, his eyes never leaving hers. "It just felt ... right. Like you needed gentleness instead of violence." Kaya's world tilted. Her claws, which had been extended and ready to strike, slowly retracted. The plasma blade in her hand flickered and died as her concentration shattered. For the first time in her adult life, she was vulnerable, and it terrified her. She stared down at this stranger who had somehow seen past her warrior's facade to something deeper, something she had buried beneath years of training and duty. He wasn't looking at her with fear or desire for conquest. He was looking at her with recognition, as if he saw not just the weapon she had become, but the woman she had forgotten she could be. The battle that raged within her now was far more dangerous than any physical combat she had ever faced. Every instinct screamed at her to finish what she had started, to eliminate the threat and protect her people. But his touch, that impossibly knowing touch, had awakened something she thought had died with her family years ago. That hope got, and that terrified her more than any enemy ever could. 3 hours had passed since the moment that changed everything, and Kaya still couldn't understand her own actions. She should have killed the intruder the instant her blade touched his throat. Instead, she found herself leading him through the winding canyon paths toward her secluded outpost, his wrists bound with energy restraints that hummed softly in the gathering darkness. Jackson walked behind her without complaint, though she could hear his labored breathing and see the way he favored his left side, where a piece of his ship's hull had gouged him during the crash. The wound needed attention, but she told herself it was only practical to keep her prisoner alive for interrogation. The lie felt bitter on her tongue. Her outpost was carved into the living rock of a cliff face, invisible from above and accessible only through a narrow passage that she could defend alone if necessary. Inside, bioluminescent crystals cast a soft blue glow across the sparse but functional space-sleeping alcove. Food storage, weapons rack, and a small medical station that she'd never expected to use on an alien. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to the stone bench beside her sleeping. Furs. When he complied without resistance, she found herself studying his profile in the crystal light. His features were angular but gentle, with a strong jaw softened by the way he held his mouth, as if he were always on the verge of smiling. The contrast to her own sharp-edged features was striking. Kaya retrieved medical supplies from the wall. Unit, her movements efficient despite the turmoil in her mind. She knelt beside him and reached for the torn fabric of his shirt, then froze as his hand caught hers. "Thank you," he said simply. The words hit her like a physical blow. When had anyone thanked her for anything beyond her skill in battle? She pulled her hand free and roughly tore open his shirt, revealing the wound, a jagged gash that bled sluggishly across his ribs. It was deep, but not life-threatening, though infection could be deadly if left untreated. As she cleaned the wound with antiseptic gel, he spoke quietly, his voice carrying none of the fear she expected from a prisoner. "My name is Jackson Thorne. I'm an explorer with the Terran Survey Corps. We study distant worlds to understand the universe better, not to conquer or colonize." "Lies," she muttered, though her touch remained gentle as she applied healing compound to his injury. "All sky dwellers seek to dominate what they find." "Some do," he admitted, wincing as she sealed the wound with bioadhesive. "But not all of us. I've spent my life studying beautiful, untouched worlds like yours. I would never want to see them harmed." Despite herself, Kaya found her hands lingering on his skin as she worked. His flesh was warm beneath her fingers, unmarked by the ritual scars that covered her own body. There was something mesmerizing about his smoothness, the way his muscles shifted under her touch. When she realized she was tracing patterns on his chest rather than tending his wound, she jerked back as if burned. "Tell me about your world," she said abruptly, needing to break the spell his proximity cast over her. She busied herself with putting away the medical supplies, but she could feel his eyes following her movements. For the next hour, Jackson painted pictures with his words, vast oceans that sparkled under twin suns, cities that floated among the clouds, forests where trees grew in spirals toward the sky. He spoke of music that could heal hearts, and technology that created rather than destroyed. His passion for discovery was evident in every word, and despite her training, Kaya found herself captivated. "What about you?" he asked when she'd grown. Quiet, absorbed in his tales. "What is your world like beyond these canyons?" She hesitated, unused to anyone caring about her thoughts beyond military strategy. "Beautiful," she said finally, "and dying." The words came haltingly at first, then in a rush as something inside her broke free. She told him about the crystal, cities that sang in harmony with the wind, about the great libraries where her people's history was preserved in living memory stones. She spoke of the gradual dimming of their world as resources grew scarce and their population dwindled, how the younger generations had lost hope for the future. When she finished, silence settled between them like a bridge neither dared cross. Jackson shifted on the bench, and she looked up to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't name, something between wonder and sorrow. "May I see them?" he asked softly. "Your scars, they're beautiful." No one had ever called her scars beautiful. They were marks of honor, symbols of battles won and pain endured, but never beautiful. Her people respected them, feared them even, but beauty was reserved for unmarked skin and gentle spirits. Against every instinct, she found herself extending her arm toward him. His fingers traced the raised patterns that spiraled from her wrist. To her shoulder, the mark of her first kill, the symbol of her clan, the intricate knot that marked her as one of the elite. His touch was reverent, almost worshipful, and it sent fire racing through her veins. "Each one tells a story," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion she didn't recognize. "Then you must have lived 1,000 lifetimes," he murmured, his thumb brushing over the star-shaped scar just above her heart. "This one is different, more personal." She should have pulled away, should have reminded herself that he was her prisoner, her enemy. Instead, she leaned into his touch and felt something crack open inside her chest. "My family," she breathed. "They died in the last invasion. I was ... I couldn't save them." When Jackson's arms came around her, she didn't resist. She let herself be held, let herself remember what it felt like to be comforted rather than feared. His hand found the calming point on her neck again, and this time she melted into the touch, her forehead resting against his shoulder. For the first time in years, the warrior Kaya had built around her heart began to crumble, revealing the woman she had buried beneath duty and pain. And in that moment, she realized her greatest battle was no longer external. It was learning how to be vulnerable again. 5 days had passed since Jackson's capture, and the routine they'd fallen into felt dangerously natural. Each morning, Kaya would release him from the energy restraints that served more as a pretense than actual security, and they would train together in the sheltered courtyard behind her outpost. She told herself she was teaching him survival skills he'd need if he ever hoped to leave this world alive. But the truth was more complicated. The truth was that she craved his company with an intensity that frightened her. "Your stance is too rigid," she said, circling him as he attempted the defensive position she'd shown him. "You're thinking like a human. On Velen, flexibility keeps you alive." Jackson adjusted his posture, muscles shifting beneath the simple tunic she'd given him to replace his ruined shirt. His hair had grown longer over the past few days, falling across his forehead in a way that made her fingers itch to brush it back. She forced herself to focus on his form, on the lesson, on anything, but the way her heart raced whenever he was. "Near. Better," she murmured, stepping behind him to adjust the angle of his shoulders. The moment her hands touched him, electricity seemed to arc between them. She felt him tense, heard his sharp intake of breath, and knew he felt it too, this pull that grew stronger with each passing hour. "Now, when I attack, don't try to overpower me," she said, her voice rougher than intended. Use my momentum against me. She lunged forward, expecting him to fumble the counter as he had all week. Instead, he moved with sudden grace, catching her wrist and using her own forward motion to spin her around until her back pressed against his chest, his arm encircling her waist. They froze like that, breathing hard, her heart hammering against her ribs where his forearm rested. Like that? He asked, his voice a whisper against her ear. She could feel every line of his body against hers, could smell the clean scent of him mixed with the soap she'd provided. His breath stirred the fine hairs at her temple, and when she turned her head slightly, his lips were mere inches from hers. Yes, she breathed, exactly like that. For a moment that stretched like eternity, they stayed frozen in that embrace. Then reality crashed back, and she pulled away so quickly she stumbled. Her cheeks burned with shame at her loss of control, at the way her body had responded to his nearness. "That's enough for today," she said curtly, not trusting herself to look at him. But Jackson didn't let her retreat into her shell as easily as before. "Kaya, wait." Something in his tone made her turn back. He was watching her with those impossibly green eyes, his expression serious and intent. "You don't have to hide from me," he said quietly. "I see you. Not the warrior, not the weapon your people shaped you into. I see the woman underneath, and she's magnificent." The words hit her like physical blows. No one had ever spoken to her this way, had ever looked past her reputation and training to see her as simply ... herself. The walls she'd built around, her heart trembled under the weight of his sincerity. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "I am the weapon. There's nothing else left." "That's not true." He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek. "I've seen you laugh at my stories about Earth. I've watched you care for that injured bird you found yesterday, thinking I wasn't looking. I've felt your gentleness when you tend my wounds. You're so much more than what they made you." Tears she hadn't shed in years threatened to spill from her eyes. "I lost everything," she whispered. "My parents, my brother, my mate-to-be. They all died because I wasn't strong enough, fast enough, good enough to save them. And you've been punishing yourself ever since," he said, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Kaya, their deaths weren't your fault. You were one person against an army." The dam burst then, and she collapsed against him, sobbing for the first time since she'd stood over her family's graves. He held her while she grieved, his hands stroking her hair and back, his voice murmuring wordless comfort in her ear. When the storm passed, she found herself looking up at him through tear-wet lashes, seeing compassion instead of pity in his eyes. "How do you do that?" she asked. "How do you make me feel safe when I've forgotten what safety feels like?" Instead of answering with words, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she didn't want to retreat anymore. She wanted to fall into this feeling, to remember what it was like to be desired not for her skills in battle, but simply for who she was. She kissed him back with growing passion, her hands fisting in his tunic as she pulled him closer. He tasted like the sweet water from her hidden spring, like hope and possibility, and everything she'd thought she'd lost forever. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, their foreheads resting together. "This is madness," she whispered, but she made no move to step away. "Then let's be mad together," he replied, and kissed her again. This time, gentleness gave way to desperate need. She led him back into her dwelling, her hands already working at the fastenings of his tunic. They moved together toward her sleeping alcove, shedding clothes and inhibitions with equal abandon. When he laid her down among the soft furs, his hands mapping every scar and curve of her body, she felt beautiful for the first time in her life. "You're perfect," he breathed against her skin, his lips trailing fire down her throat to the hollow between her breasts. Every mark, every line of you is perfect. She had never made love without the shadow of dominance and submission that colored all Vellani relationships. With her people, even intimacy was a form of combat, a display of power and control. But Jackson touched her with reverence, with tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. He worshipped her body as if she were something precious rather than dangerous. When he moved above her, his eyes locked with hers, she felt the last of her defenses crumble. This wasn't conquest or submission. This was connection, pure and transformative. As they moved together in the ancient rhythm of lovers, she understood that she was being reborn in his arms, transformed from weapon to woman through the alchemy of his touch. Afterward, as they lay entwined among the furs, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her sweat-dampened skin, she allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where she didn't have to choose between duty and happiness, where love wasn't a weakness to be purged, but a strength to be embraced. But even as she dreamed, she knew their time was running short. Soon, her people would come looking for her. And when they did, she would face the hardest choice of her life. For now, though, she had this moment, this perfect sanctuary of two hearts, beating as one beneath the alien stars. The sound of approaching aircraft shattered the peaceful morning like glass against stone. Kaya bolted upright from where she lay curled against Jackson's chest, her warrior instincts snapping to full alertness. Through the narrow window of her dwelling, she could see the distinctive shimmer of cloaked Vellani patrol craft descending toward the canyon. "They've found us," she breathed, her heart hammering with panic she hadn't felt since childhood. Jackson was already moving, rolling from the sleeping furs and reaching for his clothes with the quick efficiency of someone accustomed to danger. "How long do we have?" "Minutes, maybe less." She grabbed her ceremonial armor from its stand, the midnight blue plates seeming to absorb the morning light. Her fingers shook as she fastened the familiar straps and buckles, transforming herself back into the weapon her people expected her to be. The lead craft touched down in the courtyard with a whisper of displaced air. Through the crystalline viewport, Kaya could see Commander Voss stepping down from the cockpit, his scarred face grim with disapproval. Behind him came three other shadow blades, their hands resting casually on their weapons, a gesture that looked relaxed, but was anything but. "Kaya of the Nightwind clan," Voss's voice echoed through the amplification system, formal and cold. "You will present yourself immediately. You have been absent from your assigned patrol for 6 rotations. Without authorization." She closed her eyes, drawing on every lesson in deception she'd ever learned. When she opened them again, Jackson was watching her with an expression of understanding that nearly broke her heart. "You have to tell them I'm dead," he said quietly. "I won't let them." "Yes, you will." He caught her hands in his grip firm and steady. "Because if you don't, they'll execute both of us. And I'd rather die knowing you lived than have us both burn for a love that your people will never understand." The truth of his words cut deep, but she couldn't deny their logic. In the rigid hierarchy of Vellani society, her failure to kill an intruder was treason. Her feelings for him would be seen as the ultimate betrayal of everything her people stood for. "There's a passage," she said urgently, leading him toward a concealed panel in the back wall. "It leads to the old mining tunnels. Follow them east until you reach the thermal vents, then head north to the wreckage of your ship. If any of the communication equipment survived, I'll find a way off-world," he finished. "And then I'll find a way back to you." The amplified voice came again, closer now. "You have 30 seconds, warrior. Do not test my patience." Jackson pulled her into his arms, kissing her with desperate intensity. She memorized every detail, the taste of his lips, the scent of his skin, the way his hands tangled in her hair. as if he could anchor her to him through touch alone. "I love you," he whispered against her mouth. "Whatever happens, remember that." "I love you too," she replied, the words torn from the depths of her soul. "Find me among the stars, Jackson Thorne. I'll be waiting." He disappeared into the hidden passage, just as the outer door burst open. Kaya had just enough time to activate the panel's camouflage and palm a small energy blade before Commander Voss strode into her dwelling, his cold eyes scanning every corner. "Report," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Kaya drew herself to full attention, every line of her body screaming military discipline. "The intruder has been eliminated, Commander. His ship crashed in Sector 7-4. I tracked him to this location and executed him for trespassing on sacred ground." Voss's gaze lingered on the rumpled sleeping furs, on the 2 sets of eating utensils that lay beside her cooking alcove. His nostrils flared slightly, and she knew he was detecting unfamiliar scents, human pheromones mixed with her own. "Where is the body?" he asked, his tone dangerously quiet. "Incinerated." She forced her voice to remain steady, channeling every lesson in battlefield deception she'd ever learned. "I used a plasma charge to ensure complete destruction. Nothing remains but ash scattered on the wind. And it took you 6 rotations to accomplish this simple task." The mockery in his voice made her jaw clench, but she held her ground. The alien was wounded, but cunning. "He led me on an extended chase through the canyon systems before I cornered him here. I wanted to interrogate him first, to learn if others were coming." "And what did you learn from this ... interrogation?" Heat flooded her cheeks as memories of the past week flashed through her mind. Jackson's gentle hands mapping her scars, his whispered words of love, the way he'd made her feel beautiful and whole instead of broken and dangerous. She pushed the images down, burying them beneath layers of practiced stoicism. "He was alone," she said. "A scout from the Terran territories. His ship malfunctioned during a routine survey mission. No immediate threat to our security." Voss studied her for a long moment, his scarred features unreadable. Then he gestured to one of his subordinates, a lean female warrior named Zara, whose reputation for ruthlessness nearly matched his own. "Search the perimeter," he ordered. "Look for signs of this alleged chase, and test the ambient radiation levels. A plasma incineration should have left traces." Terror clawed at Kaya's throat, but she forced herself to remain calm. The mining tunnels ran deep, and if Jackson moved quickly, he should be well beyond detection. Range by now. She had to trust that his survival instincts were as sharp as his intelligence. While Zara conducted her search, Voss moved closer to Kaya, his presence radiating menace like heat from a forge. "You seem different, warrior. This extended isolation has softened you somehow." "I am the same weapon I have always been," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Are you?" His hand moved to his plasma blade, fingers caressing the activation stud. "Because the Kaya I trained would never have hesitated to bring me proof of her kill. The Kaya I shaped into the perfect instrument of death would have delivered the alien's head as a trophy." Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to shrug casually. "Perhaps age has made me less theatrical in my methods. The end result remains the same. The threat has been eliminated." Zara returned from her patrol, her expression troubled. "I found traces of the crash site and signs of pursuit through the eastern canyons. The radiation signature is unusual, but within acceptable parameters for a plasma incineration." Voss nodded slowly, but his eyes never left Kaya's face. "Very well. You will return with us immediately for debriefing. The Council wishes to hear your full report." As they prepared to leave, Kaya cast one last look at the dwelling that had become a sanctuary of love and hope. Somewhere in the tunnels, Below, Jackson was making his way toward freedom, carrying her heart with him into an uncertain future. She had chosen loyalty to her people over the man she loved, duty over desire. It was the decision any proper warrior would make. So why did it? Feel like she was dying inside? 8 months had passed since the morning Kaya watched Jackson disappear into the mining tunnels, and every day felt like a lifetime of emptiness. She moved through her duties like a ghost haunting her own life, training new recruits, patrolling the boundaries, filing reports that meant nothing to her anymore. Her fellow warriors praised her renewed focus. Her commanders noted her increased dedication to duty. But inside she felt hollow as a discarded shell. The summons came on a day when the twin moons hung low in the crimson sky, casting the council chambers in blood-colored light. Elder Thane stood at the center of the circular room, his ancient features grave as he addressed the assembled warriors. "Unprecedented contact has been made," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of momentous change. "A diplomatic vessel from the Terran Coalition has requested an audience. They claim to seek peaceful relations and cultural exchange." Kaya's heart stopped, then began hammering so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. Around her, the other warriors murmured in confusion and anger, the same reflexive hostility that had shaped their people's xenophobia for generations. "Who speaks for these sky dwellers?" Commander Voss demanded, his hand already moving toward his weapon. "Their lead diplomat is someone who claims intimate knowledge of our world and customs," Elder Thane replied, his eyes finding Kaya's across the chamber. "He specifically requested that Shadowblade Kaya serve as cultural liaison for the negotiations." The world tilted beneath her feet. It was impossible, miraculous, terrifying. Jackson had kept his promise. He had found a way back to her. But his return brought dangers she could barely comprehend. If anyone suspected their connection, if her deception was discovered, "I volunteer to eliminate this threat before it can spread its poison," Voss snarled, his scarred face twisted with familiar hatred. "No." The word escaped Kay's lips before she could stop it, drawing every eye in the chamber. She forced herself to stand straighter, to channel the authority her reputation afforded her. If the Terrans truly seek peace, killing their diplomats would be both dishonorable and strategically unwise. It would confirm their worst assumptions about our people and potentially provoke the larger conflict we've spent generations avoiding. Elder Thane nodded slowly. "Wisdom speaks through you, young warrior. You will meet with their representative tomorrow at dawn, determine their true intentions, and report back to this council." As the assembly dispersed, Kaya felt as though she was walking underwater, every movement requiring tremendous effort. Tomorrow she would see Jackson again, but she would have to pretend he was a stranger. She would have to stand before him in full ceremonial armor and negotiate, as if her heart wasn't breaking with love and longing. Dawn came too quickly, and not nearly fast enough. Kaya stationed herself at the boundary coordinates the Terrans had. Transmitted, her breathing controlled and steady despite the chaos in her chest. When the diplomatic shuttle descended from the pearl-gray sky, she recognized the design's sleek lines and peaceful curves, so different from the aggressive angles. A Villani warcraft. The hatch opened with a soft hiss, and Jackson stepped out wearing formal diplomatic robes in deep blue and silver. He looked older somehow, more confident, but his eyes were the same green that haunted her dreams. For a moment that stretched like eternity, they simply stared at each other across the small space that might as well have been an ocean. "I am Ambassador Jackson Thorne of the Terran Coalition," he said formally, his voice carrying to the recording devices she knew would be monitoring every word. "I seek audience with a representative of the Villani people." "I am Shadowblade Kaya of the Nightwind clan," she replied, grateful that her training kept her voice steady. "I will escort you to the designated meeting space." They walked in silence through the crystal formations that led to the ceremonial grove, but Kaya was acutely aware of every step he took beside her, every breath that stirred the air between them. When they reached the ancient stone circle where formal negotiations took place, he turned to face her with an expression of careful diplomacy. "I bring greetings from my people and hopes for a peaceful future between our worlds," he said, but his eyes were saying something entirely different. They were saying, "I love you, and I've missed you, and I never stopped believing we could find a way." "Your message has been received," she replied formally. Then, because she couldn't help herself, she added, "Did your journey here cost you much?" The smallest smile touched his lips, barely visible but unmistakably there. "Everything I valued was left here when I departed. I've come to reclaim what was taken from me by circumstances beyond our control." Her heart soared even as her mind screamed warnings. They were dancing on the edge of a blade, revealing too much with every carefully chosen word. But she couldn't bring herself to care about the danger when he was standing so close she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. The formal negotiations lasted 3 hours, with Jackson presenting his people's proposals for trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense pacts. His arguments were compelling, his manner respectful, but not subservient. When he spoke of his time learning about Felani culture, his voice carried such genuine appreciation that even Kaya's recorded monitors would have to acknowledge his sincerity. "There is one final matter," he said as the session drew to a close. "My people would be honored if a representative of your warrior class would visit our worlds, to see firsthand our commitment to peace and to serve as an ongoing liaison between our peoples." Kaya's breath caught. He was offering her a way out, a chance to leave this world of duty and blood for the stars she dreamed of with him. But accepting would mean abandoning everything she'd ever known, everyone she'd sworn to protect. "Such a decision would require extensive consideration," she said carefully. "Of course." His eyes held hers with burning intensity. "But perhaps the representative could begin by observing our diplomatic procedures. There is much to learn from seeing how different cultures approach conflict resolution." That evening, as crimson dusk painted the sky, Kaya found herself alone with Jackson in the guest quarters that had been prepared for him. The moment the door sealed behind them, all pretense fell away. "Kaya," he breathed, and then she was in his arms, kissing him with 8 months of desperate longing, compressed into a single moment of contact. "I thought I'd never see you again," she gasped against his lips. "I told you I'd find a way back," he murmured, his hands framing her face as if she were something precious beyond measure. "I meant every word I said in that tunnel. I love you, and I'm not leaving this world without you. My people will survive without one more warrior, but I won't survive without you." His thumb traced the line of her cheek, brushing away tears. She didn't realize she was crying. "Come with me, Kaya. Let me show you the universe. Let me love you among the stars." That night, they made love with the desperate passion of people who had found their way back to each other against impossible odds. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a covenant, every whispered endearment, a vow that nothing would separate them again, not in the pre-dawn darkness. As Jackson's shuttle prepared for departure, Kaya made the choice that would define the rest of her life. She walked up the boarding ramp, still wearing her ceremonial armor, but carrying a small pack containing everything that truly mattered to her: letters from her dead family, her grandmother's memory stone, and a blade that had belonged to her. "Father, are you sure?" Jackson asked as the engines hummed to life around them. She looked back once at the world that had shaped her, at the people who would see her departure as the ultimate betrayal. Then she turned to the man who had taught her that love was stronger than duty, that hope was more powerful than fear. "I'm sure," she said, taking his hand as the shuttle lifted toward the star-filled sky. "Take me home." as Velen fell away beneath them, becoming just another point of light in the cosmic darkness. Kaya understood that she wasn't losing her identity. She was finding it. She would become a bridge between worlds, using her warrior's strength not for conquest, but for connection. In Jackson's arms, surrounded by the infinite possibilities of space, she had finally discovered what she was truly meant to be. Not just a weapon, but a woman. Not just a survivor, but someone capable of transforming conflict into understanding, fear into trust, isolation into love. The stars welcomed them home.